Each time we're at a big party, and baby, won't you get a huge shebang? So me and you, we throw a wild party. We'll round up all the old gang.
This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. Our guest's illustrated version of Joseph Moncure March's Wild Party inspired not one but two Broadway musicals of it, and so we wanted to have him on our show. Here with me is my co-host, Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Art Spiegelman is one of the giants of cartooning, of illustrating. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his great series Mouse. He's a staff illustrator and writer, I believe, for the New Yorker. Mm-hmm. And he really has revived Joseph Moncure March's Jazz Age poem, The Wild Party, with a beautifully illustrated new version of it. And we are very happy to have Art Spiegelman tonight on Theater Talk.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. Susan.
All right, I got to ask you, since there are two musicals based on this poem, you've seen both of them. What do you think of the two shows? The one at the Manhattan Theater Club by Andrew Lippa, and the one on Broadway by...
I should say I feel like I was a Pied Piper unintentionally tootling these people off a cliff. It was never meant to be a play. It's a wonderful poem, and it presents such difficulties as a play, because it has enough story to fill a thimble. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the qualities that attracted me to the poem, and I think ultimately attracted the Manhattan Theater Club and George Wolfe, is the language is. Very, very snappy. It's rhyming patter, the beginnings of that hard-boiled style that's now
almost a parody of itself now, yeah.
Now, yeah, but at the time it was just really hot also. It got banned in Boston. And the heat still comes off the page, even though, if you really analyze it, it's coming from, gee, they're talking about lesbians or people having sex. But
and this was 1926.
Yeah, and it caught that jazz age especially well, with a kind of curdled edge to it, and the language and the freshness of saying a dirty word for the first time comes off that thing, and I think it just has a strong attraction as a period piece, but it doesn't really have much of a story. It tells a story. It's a full-length book poem that tells the story of a love triangle of sorts, but it's so rudimentary that you can't really do much with it.
Right, right.
So I can imagine anybody who's involved in theater who would make lyrics going, Queenie was a blonde and her age stood still, and they start humming to themselves as they're reading it because it's memorable enough so that one reading leaves you with a chunk of it in your head already.
And of course you have the jazz age melodies that you think you can play with.
Yeah, that evokes such a wonderful oral landscape as well. I think it was Merchant and Ivory tried to make a movie out of The Wild Party in the 70s. It's actually, even if you like their movies, it's their weakest movie because they said, hey, this is great, and then said, there's no story here. And then as a result, they changed it. It's called The Wild Party, and it has, I think, Raquel Welch in it, maybe, or James Coco.
Is this one with Fatty
kind of
Arbuckle?
Like a cult,
yeah, and they made it Fatty Arbuckle's Party because there wasn't enough of a party going on in Joseph Moncure March's book to fill an hour-and-a-half movie.
I'm afraid you're right. I mean, that is a problem with both of the musicals. And we should say you have no connection to either one of these musicals.
Well, I have no genuine connection, although I was invited to work on poster and sets for the Manhattan Theater Club one, and I'm involved with the George Wolfe production to the extent that if it stays, or if it were to stay, if it does stay open, the artwork from The Wild Party was going to be put up in the lobby. They put drawings from the book up on their website, and I wished both productions well, you know, but ultimately the economics of it are, I stole a public domain poem ultimately and went, this is so good, and I found it in the 70s and wanted to do something with it for many, many years, and then there it was, revived. And at the time that I had found it, it was thoroughly obscure, it was totally forgotten, and that's when I'd had dinner with William Burroughs, and we were trying to find something to talk about, and after we ran out of cats, which didn't last very long, I found he was rather taciturn. I didn't have much to say about guns, and then
there was no
after
opium.
a while I was thinking, okay, poetry, and you know, theater isn't my main category. Ultimately, I must confess that poetry isn't my main category either. And I said, hey, did you ever hear of a poem called The Wild Party? And then all of a sudden he sort of looked like death warmed over, but came to life. And went, Queenie was a blonde, and her age stood still, and she danced twice a day in vaudeville. Green eyes, lips like coals aglow. Her face was... And he went on for about 20 minutes. And he hadn't read it in decades. And he said, The Wild Party is the book that made me want to become a writer. And I think that same aspect, its absolute hard-boiled edge and its transgressiveness, just probably knocked him out.
I'm curious, both of the musicals are written by two young composers. Do you have a sense of what the attraction for a young writer might be of this poem now? What do you think they're trying to say about our own age?
I think there's several things. One is the language really is intoxicating. And I think that anybody who's going to be sensitive to language, like presumably playwrights, would find themselves drawn in. Then I think the fact that I was trying to figure it out after seeing these two different productions, and I think one aspect of it is what's the antonym to political correctness? Political incorrectness, I guess. Yeah. Its political incorrectness is very attractive, because at the same time that we're living through a moment where, in a sense, everything's permitted, everything's also simultaneously forbidden. Right. And the fact that this just feels licentious and open and willing to be racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, and it's a world in which people drink to excess, smoke awful things. And I think that that's very attractive.
Almost refreshing, given
it's just like, oh, what a relief.
Yeah. Right.
So there's that. I think there's also the fact that probably young folks like to go to parties, you know, so there's that aspect to it, I suppose. But the main thing is that culturally, I think we're at a moment that it's not really like the 20s in most ways, but it has certain thing going for it, which is a wild stock market. And I believe that especially as it came closer to being produced, and they had to talk to people who were heavily invested in the stock market, they understood the relevance of this play for today.
That's a very good point.
I want to say, Art, going back to your involvement, I don't think you give yourself enough credit that in the same way that, for instance, Michelangelo's statue of Moses then gave a face to Moses, I think your illustrations for this poem gave it a look.
Oh, it absolutely
and
did,
these
sure.
two people,
and also, this poem would not have, they would never have found
That's
this
right.
poem. And this was really out of print.
Yeah, well, you found it in an old bookstore, right?
I found it in the early 70s or late 60s even. I was wandering around, found this thing just because it was a bookstore, a used bookstore that had slim pickings in the sections I usually go into. I was wandering through the poetry section. A spine attracted my attention because it had a good typeface. Pulled it out, and then there was this interesting frontispiece, and it was a poem, but I figured I'd start reading and then found out, oh, wow, more fool he, she was lesbian. What's this, you know?
Here's a picture of the character Burrs, who's a clown, and I just want to show how Mandy Patinkin's visage
It's
so
uncanny, isn't it?
strikingly resembles
He turned into
what you
my
created.
drawing, I know.
Yes,
That's right.
and he gives a very striking performance.
He does.
No pun intended.
It's striking. He's hitting the actors. That's how striking that performance
He's remarkable.
is.
He's remarkable in this role, and he really did take on the character that you visualized.
He did, although it has another aspect, and that's the most interesting thing about these productions to me, which is, so in the George Wolfe production, he's in blackface, right? He's a
Yes,
Joseph blackface.
and you didn't do that, right?
No, which has to do, A, with the transgressive nature of the poem and finding something transgressive now. And it also is so accurate. I mean, it should have been. If I'd really inhabited that poem forever and thought about it, maybe I would have come up with the idea. No, they say clown, but what they really mean is they're talking about vaudeville. And vaudeville is that Al Jolson face, and it just adds so much electricity to what that whole thing is about. Both productions tried to figure out how to work the race issues in, you know. It's handled very off the cuff in the book, just about black hands on white skin is one of the lines or something like that.
Well, that is, I think, that is inherently a problem when you transfer something like a poem to the stage, because in a poem you can be subtle, on the stage you can't always.
I would never describe this poem as subtle.
Well, black hands on white skin.
But the thing is that I think what happened in every instance here, anybody who approaches this has to bring something else to it, because it is a completed work on its own that doesn't allow for translation outward easily, so that the movie I was describing had to graft Fatty Arbuckle's a whole other party from a different era even into this world in order to have enough story. I think that the Manhattan Theater Club production very earnestly just tried to find a way to breathe life into the characters, and earnestness is one of the qualities of that production. You know, like, I actually kind of like the idea that, hey, let's put on a show, is something that you really feel from this kind of exuberance that's in this thing. And if anything, it doesn't feel lewd and creepy. It feels sort of bawdy at best, or exuberant, you know, where you could have the blue-haired ladies coming up from Florida, and as long as they were willing not to get offended, They go, oh, isn't she cute when she does that lesbian number?
It's like a Judy Garland show, a Judy Garland party, really.
Now,
really.
That's very different than what happened in the George Wolfe one, where it really went into the kind of the more sordid aspects of the twins. As a result, it was a far riskier thing to put up, and that's what attracts me to it.
More stirring, yeah.
Because it really is, it does have not the same dangers that the poem had in 1920. You can't do that anymore. Right. But it has something that feels dangerous now, and I think it obviously totally freaked out that Times critic. Just,
I think that's very astute.
I think
Ben Brownlee.
I think he just got upset, which is what the poem was meant to do. So, in a sense, it's because Michael John Lucusa and George Wolfe found that equivalent feeling of danger, that it actually did something. And he did it also by grafting not the Fatty Arbuckle party, but Ann Douglas's book on the 20s into it. So it's not taking another showbiz party, but taking a historical, analytic, partisan essay about the history of America as seen through the 1920s, and making that the subtext extra bit of business that'll flesh out this production. And that's a very strange thing to do, because essays don't usually get musicalized.
That's what I was going to say. That's a lot of baggage for a musical to carry.
Yeah, but that's what makes it interesting, because in a way, again, I have no strong vested interest in this. I just I like the fact that both of them happened, because it was kind of educational for me, like seeing these things get translated. And they were both so different from each other. It'd be nice if they could run in neighboring theaters, so you could kind of go back and forth and see them have Although, wait, what was somebody's wisecrack was, I think the Pat production is running across the street from the Music Man, and they're talking about having like little signs on the box office for Music Man, no blowjobs, blowjobs over here. You know, you can choose your production. But the
that might bring actually some people that they need at that Wild Party in if you put it that
But the Wild Party that uses this essay isn't really a Broadway thing, except that it has these very recognizable performers in it. It has a very elaborate production.
It actually
quality.
made them better off down at the Public Theater.
Somehow, because I think that Broadway, I don't go very much, and I assume it's supposed to be sort of, well, you've got to get like a lot of people to spend a lot of money every night for this thing to happen, and it doesn't lead to the kind of adventurousness that this particular production is moving toward. You know?
You better watch out, because the producers of Saturday Night Fever may ask you to illustrate their program. I'm sure. We talk to a lot of playwrights here about writing. Seldom do we get to talk to an artist. I'm curious if you can take
I'm
us...
writing a play.
You're writing... Well,
I'm an authority.
If you could just take us through, when you read a poem like this, what goes on in your mind when you sit down and you start to sketch it out? How does reading the poem become these great illustrations?
Well, it really happens as a result of, this thing just asks to be visualized throughout. And the problem I found was, I'm not usually an illustrator per se. I make up my own content and my own books and my own pictures. When I do New Yorker covers, it's my ideas. So lending myself to this, I had to find a way to not betray the writer, which meant if you really illustrate, okay, this is what Queenie looks like. Essentially, you're robbing the reader of something. It's in the nature of illustration to do that. It makes the book kind of a nice thing to hold and flip through. I wanted to make a nice book object, so the end papers on the hardcover feel like a kind of 1920s whorehouse. They're velvet. But the main thing was I decided to over-illustrate it. All I really had to do was about 8 to 12 illustrations, and my book contract was solved. And instead, there's about 60. And I figured if I do too many illustrations, since in some level, the ultimate in any concept is its opposite. I figured if I do too many, it's like doing none. So if I draw, he gave her wrist a twist, and show a wrist being twisted, and show which direction the wrist is twisting in, there would somehow be this acknowledgement of over-colonizing, an over-inhabiting of the territory that would allow you to see the pictures as decorations rather than as a kind of theft of what the words might conjure up. That was the original notion. And then the most fun I had in doing the book was figuring out where the pictures would fall on the page, so it would have what in the magazine business is called a good flip, so that when you go through the book, it just feels like you can't predict how the pictures are going to fall,
so that
how
there's
they'll
energy
interact.
there.
So it feels like an activated book.
Right. Okay, we do want to talk briefly about Drawn to Death, because you are now writing an opera.
It's an
three-panel opera, it's called.
but it started out as an opera. It's now, like, I think more a music theater thing with a really great jazz score with some songs in it. And it's about the rise and fall of the American comic book. And also ultimately about the issues that have to do some way tangentially related to the Wild Party, which have to do with issues of censorship. It's about how the comic book was accused, as say video games are, or the internet, or whatever, rock and roll, rap music, of causing delinquency.
Corrupting young minds.
Corrupting the youth. So there's a song here called Poison in the Nursery about this that leads to these Senate trials, which make up the second part of the second act. And it's all done with, when I was first invited to do something, and it's changed a lot since those few years ago when I was first invited to do the libretto for an opera, I figured I should know what an opera is. So I went and looked at one, and I found that there are all these this text above the singers at the City Opera, and on the front of your chair there was text. And I realized, okay, if I do this about comics, I can use balloons, and I'll be on home turf, because the libretto can appear
That's right.
in balloons and have the words there to make it more comforting for me. And unfortunately, as I learned more about opera, I learned how important the music was, so I dissolved the first relationship because it wasn't a kind of a style of music I was comfortable with. And now I found that working with Philip Johnston, who's a jazz composer, has been just terrific.
And are you using famous comic book characters in the piece?
Yeah, it's basically about two comic book artists. One is actually, I did a piece last year, a text piece and some drawings about Jack Cole.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
He did Plastic
Man. I love Plastic Man.
And so there's a character based on Plastic Man called the Rubber Pup, and a character based on Jack Cole. And there's another cartoonist named Bob Wood, who was not nearly the genius that Jack Cole was, but they were friends, and he was the editor and an artist for something called Crime Doesn't Pay, which was the most popular comic after World War II. It was sort of the story of Legs Diamond or Ma Barker or whatever, and it really led to the kind of censorship that happened in the 50s. His comic was the turnaround point. Now, after the censorship happened, the comics were almost out of business. They were really on their knees. And Bob Wood just became, instead of like a three-fourths time drunk, a full-time drunk. And in 1958, murdered his extramarital girlfriend in a Gramercy Park hotel room. So the tawdry irony of...
This guy went to a few wild parties, it sounds like.
The tawdry irony that the guy who edited Crime Doesn't Pay comics committed a murder got me launched.
Art Spiegelman, you've been a terrific guest. We will look forward to Drawn to Death. Do you have a timetable for this opera?
Well, I think May 18th and 19th, there's a workshop concert version of it at St. Anne's. And after that, it's going to be workshopped. I've never gone through this particular journey. I think out in Portland, and then ART in Cambridge, I think in a year, wants to do an event.
Oh, so it's pre-sold.
Yeah, it's a quarter pre-sold while developing.
Welcome to the theater, Art. You're going to face Ben Brantley pretty soon,
you know
too.
what was really funny? Except I have no interest in Broadway. It's just like that idea of not being able to think something through. Like the good quality of the Pat production is it really is trying to think something through, and it got slammed for it. What I found, though, is I used to work in underground comics, and I finally found a new career that is less lucrative than underground comics. That was really hard.
That's right. You're getting too successful of a cartoonist.
Welcome to the theater, Art. Art Spiegelman.
Wait.
What show?
You want to plug the
No, I
upcoming...
didn't want to plug it. I just brought it because it has some drawings from the Wild Party in it.
Oh, make him drop some in there.
So
This is a very sexy drawing.
Well, you just pointing to the back cover and saying
Yes,
that's a really sexy drawing.
Yeah, very sexy.
And that was something interesting to me about both Wild Parties, which is was more true when I saw the preview of the Joseph Papp Wild Party. But in both instances, the actress who played Queenie was very, very good. And in the preview and in the first Manhattan Theater Club version, Queenie was sort of sexually subdued compared to the real sexuality had to do with homosexuality in both productions. And that was kind of a strange thing for me.
Welcome to the theater.
Welcome to the theater, but it was also an interesting thing that had to do with what's at least more transgressive now. How transgressive is it to have a sexy woman? So I figured that both of them really should have had a transvestite playing Queenie. You know, that would have made it easier. Although ultimately, I must say that what's her name?
Toni Collette.
Toni Collette did it. By the time she was at opening night, she really found something that.
But they made her a martyr, didn't they?
Well, both of them tried to do this thing. There was a word that was interesting to me in one of the reviews. I think in John Lahr's review, which I didn't quite agree with either. But he says something about earned and unearned, like unearned endings or something. And it's true that in neither instance do these people who are very 2D in the poem, do they come alive enough for that to be the center of gravity, where she's now going to unmask herself. What was really interesting in the Wolf production, you can cut all this out if I'm blabbing.
No,
too
we
much,
love it, yeah.
But what was really interesting in the Wolf production was an idea that I don't think has been fully found yet. It should have been allowed to develop a little bit longer, which has to do with masks. You know, like there's a line very early in the poem that says her face was a tinted mask of snow, and that becomes very important to the Wolf production, that she's peeling off that mask at the end to try to find out who she is. Right. But that as a kind of rhyme to the blackface mask is really kind of cool. There's something in that, and I don't feel that, and I feel that somehow that was the central narrative, and it wasn't allowed to be, like that it had to move through the kind of more banal story of what to do with this guy Black who comes in and disrupts their life. And in both instances, Black doesn't quite work. You know, in the Manhattan Theater Club version, I thought it was really exciting to have Tay Garnett be Black. That was a great idea. And yet, isn't it strange that when you saw both of them, right?
Yeah,
obviously.
Sure, yeah.
But when Burrs is really furious, murderously furious, he doesn't even call Black Black. Why? I mean, it's so out of kilter.
In the poem, you and March make him more like a preppy aristocrat.
Yeah, well, that's in the poem. He originally was like. It was something interesting as well, which is like he's from outside their milieu, and he sees Queenie as virginal, and therefore gives her the desire to be virginal again. And that's something else. That's at least a motive.
They should have hired you to write the book to these musicals.
Well, Joseph, but the thing was that in the one where Tay Garnett is Black, it's very interesting, and it's appropriate, it's correct, and yet it's not correct for then the people in the party to ignore the fact that he's Black. That's just.
That's
hollow. That's untrue.
Correctness.
That's untrue. And that pulling back from the consequences of the casting decision, I think, weakened something very central to their version. In the other version, I thought that there was something kind of peculiar about making Black a gigolo, because in a sense, he's one more of the same. You know?
So then, in a room full of gigolos, right?
Yeah, so since everybody's sort of like, so why would that be enough to yank her out of her situation? Yeah, there's a murder. I guess there's that, but it doesn't. It's not like she can fully endorse him. It's not like that meeting is of the real consequence.
Yeah.
You know. Right. So.
Well, aside from the fact, I didn't think there was much chemistry between the Black in the Wild Party and at the Public Theaters and Tony Collette. I didn't feel that.
No, it's not. But I think part of it might be
there.
the acting chemistry, but part of it also is probably in the actual conception of the character. Like, why should she, who's sort of half whore, fall in love with this guy who's half whore when she's already with a half whore and her friends are half whores? So like there's just
it should have been played by someone like you.
A full whore?
No.
Thanks. Appreciate that. All right, we got to end.
Well, okay.
End it now.
Art Spiegelman, it's been great chatting with you. Your work is brilliant. Your essayist, critic, playwright, everything. Thanks for being our guest tonight.
Jack of all trades, master.
I can tell you that no party lasts forever. I've been there and there and there and seen enough. So you better hope to Jesus or Mohammed or whatever that you've got the right to stand.
Legendary producer Alexander H. Cohen died last month at age 79. Cohen appeared on Theater Talk in December of 1998, and we want to remember him by showing you a little bit of that interview now.
If your name is on a show, finally, and the show doesn't work, you're the fellow that didn't do it. And if your name is on a show and it does work, even if you're the fellow who didn't do it, you get credit for having done it. So, I mean, you've got to take, you take it or get out of the kitchen. The judgment has to be brought down to, are you having fun? I went into this business to have fun. I've been having it for 57 years, minus a few detractors and a few arguments, and putting up with amateurs and semi-amateurs. But then you finally do arrive at dealing with the real pros. And when that happens, it's worth it.
At the close of your show, you say, you're often asked the question, what will the future of Broadway be? And you have an interesting answer to that. Want to give us that?
Well, I think that the answer is that Broadway will catered to the musicals and events that cost in the tens of $millions to present, and that the theater itself will find itself off-Broadway, what we call off-Broadway now, and as my pal David Rothenberg puts it, in some very interesting places. And thinking back and approaching the millennium at the same time, the theater 100 years ago was at 2nd Avenue and 14th Street. There was nothing above that until the Messrs. Schubert, Lee, and J.J. started to build uptown. And 100 years from now, the theater will be in some highly unlikely places. But it will always be there because it has essentially more to offer the public than film, and certainly, forgive me, television.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Friedrich Loewe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, and public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
Playbill Online is the official website of Theater Talk and the home of the Playbill Club, providing exciting opportunities for theater lovers. We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.